What is the scariest thing you've ever seen that you can't explain? I was maybe 10 years old, and my grandma had just died. I didn't really know her well because she had spent most of my young life in a nursing home and often didn't remember who I was when I went to visit. But whenever I visited, she would always rub my back. It was sort of an instinctual comfort thing. She did it to all her kids and grandkids. For about a year after she died, I would be sitting in my room at night, alone, and start to feel someone rubbing my back like she used to. It freaked me out until one night when I acknowledged it and said, "Thank you, Grandma." It stopped after that, and I never felt it again. I was about to cross the street when a lady put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I looked at her, trying to figure out what was going on, a car crash happened, and one of the cars went tumbling down the street just 2 feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would absolutely be dead. I turned to look at her again, and she was no longer there. I could see for blocks in each direction. There was nowhere she could have gone that fast without me being able to see her. The only thing I can come up with is that I imagined it happening in my memory because of how traumatic the crash was. I've never experienced anything even slightly supernatural before or after that. Roughly 15 years ago, I was in upstate New York with my uncle at our family house. It's pretty quiet up there and not a lot of people around. My uncle and I were outside when it started to downpour, so we went inside. We were looking out the front door together, and my uncle was commenting on how hard it was raining. This area is also pretty rural, so it's mostly pitch black outside with only our front porch light illuminating the area. As we were looking out the door, we both saw someone on the road, sort of speed walking. It was so dark, but their skin was so pale that we could see their hands swaying as they walked, and then their face as they turned toward our house. All I remember was that the face had no eyes. My uncle quickly shut the door and said not to worry, that it was probably just someone who got caught in the rain. I was scared, but he calmed me down. I was little, so I don't remember too much after that other than my uncle keeping watch for a while. I forgot about this story until years later when I brought it up to him because I thought maybe it had been a dream. His attitude changed when I brought it up, and he just said he remembered but didn't want to talk about it. I have never brought it back up to him, and to this day, when I think about it, I feel really eerie. My friend and I were driving home from a gig we played in Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii. We were driving on Saddle Road, one of 2 roads from Kona to the other side of the island to Hilo Town. Saddle Road is known for being a spiritual place where lots of weird things happen. This stretch of land is about 40 kilometers with no lights or population, just lava rock. We drove along the road around 1 a.m. We were telling stories and having a good time. Then we saw on the side of the road a huge white dog wearing a gold chain, staring at us. We passed it and asked each other if we saw the same thing. We were debating whether to stop on the side of the road to pick it up. The local legend is that if you see an old lady on the road, you need to pick her up or something bad will happen. We didn't stop, and we didn't speak until we got home. I asked another local guy what that could have been. He said it was the goddess Pele's pet. I did some research. Turns out this dog has been seen sporadically since the 1950s. I worked in a nursing home for years during the night shift, and everyone always complained about weird stuff like noises on the top floor. I never believed in any of that, so I was always the one going upstairs to do night checks. One night, I was changing a resident on that floor with a colleague, and my colleague complained that he heard something like people walking. We were in the resident's room, and I had to go to the cupboard at the end of that corridor to get bed sheets. While I was coming back with the bed sheets, I kept hearing footsteps and what sounded like someone touching and opening plastic bags. I was so annoyed and looked outside the room, and I saw a shadow passing through the corridor. The thing is, the shadow was so big, like an actual person had just passed by, along with the sounds of footsteps and plastic bags. I freaked out so badly and froze completely. I had to call another colleague to come upstairs because I was too scared to come out of the residence room. Keep in mind that I don't believe in those things, and for 2 years I was always the one doing night checks on the top floor and bottom floor on my own. I never had any problems and never saw anything. Since that day, I never went upstairs alone and was always very scared. My grandfather had just died a few days earlier, and my mom was crying one night in our kitchen. I started hugging her. We had a lot of my grandfather's belongings around, but there was this broken radio that didn't even have working batteries in it sitting on the table along with other things like photos and clothes he had previously owned. This is the only unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. But while my mom was bawling and crying, the radio made a very loud, static noise for about a second. We both stared at it in silence. It was eerie. She stopped crying because even she heard it. We both just went to bed after that and haven't spoken of it since. I'd imagine if it was something paranormal, it was my grandfather letting us know he was there, but who knows? I had a dog growing up that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body. My brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school, and we brought her home. She was beloved. My brother died young. After he died, she would walk slowly in a circle around a plant we had in the living room, letting the leaves that hung down gently rub her back. Every once in a while, she would stop and look up at the plant for a moment, like she saw some kind of apparition floating above it. She would get a sad look in her eyes and let out a whimper. I'm convinced she was seeing my brother's ghost watching over us. I really love that dog. As a kid, there was a camp that had a lean-to and an old plywood caravan set against it, way out in the Australian bush from the town I grew up in. One school holiday, my friends and I went for a bush walk and stumbled across it. It didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked inside the van. Nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table, the usual old caravan stuff. We shut the door because it smelled moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to, we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. I'm pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later, and we were all still pale. There was no way anyone was in that van. No way. It still bothers me to this day. My brother and I camped out one night in the Kootenai Mountains in British Columbia. Clear sky, no moon. We could see the Milky Way, Andromeda, and so on. It was a beautiful night. Just as we were about to bed down, the horses freaked out, panicked and screaming, trying to bolt. A few seconds later, we could see why. A massive jet black shadow, vaguely bird-shaped, flew over us. It blotted out the stars above. It was completely silent, and the wind from its passing stank like putrid, rotted meat. We never saw it again. It took a good half hour to calm down the horses after it was gone. It was absolutely the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. This happened almost 20 years ago now and is definitely the strangest and, at the time, scariest thing to have happened to me. I was hanging out in my parents' basement gaming. This was peak Halo 2 era. I was home alone and got off the couch to get a snack or something. As I was on my way to the stairs, I felt an electric current shoot up my spine. It was immediate and only happened once. I had never felt anything like it in my life, so I quickly took my shirt off to make sure I was okay. I noticed a red mark appear on my right shoulder, and the longer I looked, its shape began to change. It quickly formed perfectly into a red handprint, like someone had slapped my back or something like that. It disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared, and I was left awestruck. My grandfather had passed away about a week prior to this event. He and I had a close bond, so I chalk it up to him telling me he was watching over me. If it wasn't him, I have no explanation, as this has never happened to me again. If I had a nickel for every time I've told this story on Reddit, I was around 10 years old, walking in the woods with my buddy. He was a step or two in front of me as we were walking to one of our many hangout spots on his wooded property. We both stopped dead in our tracks when we saw something in front of us. My buddy and I saw a monster. There's no other real way to describe what this was. A hominid creature that looked like it was made out of tree bark and beehive material. This thing was sitting down, facing the opposite direction, but it turned around and looked right at us. We didn't say anything to each other. We didn't do a double take. We turned around and sprinted all the way back to his house. Through the woods, up an extremely steep driveway, sprinting straight into the house, terrified. 2 days after my wife passed in 2021, my kids and I were sitting in our living room watching South Park, which she hated. It was the episode where the boys are trying to build a stairwell or ladder to heaven to get something back from Kenny's dead ass. The episode had Alan Jackson in it, my wife's favorite singer from her youth. Anyway, we're sitting there and Life 360 on my phone, and both the kids' phones goes off. Mom had left home, except her phone was on the counter in the kitchen. I thought it was just a weird glitch until I saw the location was the home of one of her Girl Scouts, a little disabled girl who my wife adored. I guess she wanted to go visit her one last time. It stayed there about 10 minutes and then arrived back at home and never did anything like that again. I worked in a haunted store. Some very bizarre things would happen overnight, but I had decided it was a former employee or somebody else with keys and the alarm code who would come in and stage things. There were no cameras since it was a small place, and this was 20 plus years ago before cameras were everywhere. Anyway, that all changed one day when another employee and I were on the second floor. There were no customers and we were just lazing about, talking shit. We saw a woman come up the stairs, so we both put on our game faces and turned to acknowledge her. But suddenly there was nobody there. We both looked at each other, and before I could even process it, all the hairs on my body stood up. The other guy described the same thing. We went downstairs, and one of the girls was stocking something right there. She said no customers had been in, and she was basically blocking the stairs anyway. It really made me reassess all the weird overnight stuff that had happened. I used to go night running pretty late, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., up a valley near my house. At one point, the road I ran on went through an area with cemeteries on both sides and an abandoned Japanese Shinto temple nearby. One night, during a run, while I was running between the cemeteries, I saw an old Asian lady standing by a bus stop. She said, "Hi," in a very slow and deliberate manner and waved at me. I nodded and smiled at her and kept jogging. My turnaround point was about 5 minutes past the bus stop, but when I turned around and ran back the way I came, the woman was gone. No cars or buses had driven past me in either direction, and I didn't see her walking anywhere. She was there when I ran up the road, and she was gone 5 minutes later when I ran down the road. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but later I realized the whole situation seemed very strange. Why was she there so late at night? Where did she go? I still get a chill up my spine, remembering the odd way she said, "Hi," and waved at me. Needless to say, I changed my running route shortly after that. There is a church around the corner from my house in Richmond Hill, Queens, 115th Street and Atlantic Avenue. I was traveling in a car near 95th Avenue with my brother, and to our right we witnessed this man, pale, with no color, huge bright eyes, and wearing only a bright white-looking robe or large cloak, walking toward the church. I saw this man floating in our direction, and my brother quickly sped off. He asked if I saw that person. I said yes, and I was trembling like I was outside in winter with no coat. He wanted to go back and see it again. When we turned around, the man had disappeared. We waited a while with no sight of him. I remember that encounter vividly, as if it happened moments ago. I used to work for a company where I would go into foreclosed homes. A lot of these houses were basically crack dens. I went into a house with a coworker at the time, and from the moment I stepped into the yard, I felt like I was being watched. We went into the house, and the entire time I felt like I was being watched, and I could see black swirling shadows standing in the corner of the room. Every room I went into, same thing. In the corner, a swirling black shadow. I would always see them out of the corner of my eye. Then when I would look directly at them, they would be gone. At one point, we heard the basement door slam shut. At that point, my coworker and I were like, "Okay, I think we're done for the day." When we were leaving, I asked the coworker if that house was weird, and he said, "Yeah, I kept seeing black shadows in the corner." I remember getting chills. After that, I refused to go back to that house. I came back to my hometown for winter break and was staying at my grandmother's for a couple of days. My grandfather had passed away a year and a half prior. Regardless, I got back one night around 11 p.m., and just as I was trying to go to bed, the alarm clock on the nightstand went off. White noise. Then an old man's voice murmured words, but not clearly. I was frozen. This went on for a couple of seconds. I reached over and turned on the lamp right beside the alarm clock. I looked at the switches, and it was in the off position, not clock, radio, alarm, etc. The voice and white noise were still going on. I then got the idea to unplug it from the wall. I reached back to unplug the alarm clock, and it wasn't even plugged in. It was scary in a sense, but more enlightening as an experience. I knew at that moment. I feel as if it was my grandfather reaching out. Unfortunately, I couldn't make out what the voice was saying. Thought I'd share. My girlfriend and I were walking my dog on our usual route in the city I live in, and an old woman was walking toward us. My dog and I both got a weird feeling about this old woman. When we were within speaking distance of her, I said good morning out of politeness. She looked up from the ground, and my heart turned ice cold. She had jet black eyes, like no white in her eyes at all, and she fucking hissed at me. My dog got really uneasy, and my girlfriend and I walked away as quickly as we could. Something was just very off about her. I have never seen her again in the 5 years of living in my neighborhood. I've heard stories of black-eyed people, and particularly black-eyed children. Not sure if she was just crazy or something otherworldly. We are both rational people who live normal lives. Still the scariest thing I've experienced that we can't explain. I lived on an old farm that had been in my family for generations. The fireplace had those smoke-stained glass doors. In Texas, we rarely ever used it. Maybe once or twice a year for winter holidays. I was about 6 and could always feel this presence staring out of the glass, you know? I had goosebumps and that hair standing up on the back of your neck feeling. I told my parents over and over how there was someone in the fireplace. They brushed it off and told me to pray. I refused to ever look directly at the doors because I knew if I did, I'd see who was in there. Unfortunately, one night, I decided to face my fears. There behind the glass was a small child, blue and ashen skin, sunken eyes, breathing cold puffs of air, knees to their chest, shivering. I was frozen still and could feel the chill creeping up. The child put their hand on the glass, and I swore I could sense the urge to open the doors. A sibling came screaming into the den before I ever moved, but I never saw the fireplace child again. No one believed me. They said I was being dramatic, but I see that face so clearly. I could always feel it staring at me and the urge to open the doors every time I was around it. I've seen other weird, ghost-like things many times, but this was my first. I once woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I could make out the silhouette of someone standing in the doorway, but when I turned on the light, no one was there. The door was still slowly closing, as if whoever, or whatever, had been standing there was just leaving. What made it even creepier was that my Nest fire alarm in the hallway had lit up from detecting movement, but there was nobody there. I still get chills thinking about it. I was on a cruise with a friend, and we were sharing a cabin. My friend was an incredibly loud snorer. He would usually stay awake until I fell asleep first, because otherwise I'd find it impossible to sleep through the noise he made. That particular night, he had a few drinks and passed out drunk, snoring loudly. It didn't bother me, though, since I had my book to read. It was about 2 a.m., and I was wide awake, reading in bed. Suddenly, I got this feeling that there was something at the foot of the bed. I glanced up, and there was this thing standing there. It looked like a person, but translucent and gray, with blurry features, kind of like a person made of television static. I got the sense that it was curious, like how a young child would watch you do something. I asked it in my head what it wanted, and as I did, it turned and walked across the room toward the door. As it moved, it disappeared. I didn't feel scared or threatened by it. I have no idea what it was. I don't drink or take drugs, so it wasn't that, and I was completely awake. Strange. Really strange. When I was a kid, my grandpa worked as the night shift custodian at a big old-school church building. My sister and I would go with him some nights because the building had a large gymnasium-type room with with tons of big exercise balls and stuff, and it was fun to run around. One night, while my grandpa was locking up a room, my sister and I heard a noise coming from down the stairs behind us. We looked over and saw an old lady leaving the building. She turned around, looked directly at us, put her finger to her lips in a gesture, and left. We didn't think too much of it at the time. We went to my grandpa and asked him if anyone else was in the building that night, like for any meetings, classes, or anything. And he said no, it was just us in the entire building. We asked him where the door down those stairs led to, and he said, "Oh, that goes out to the cemetery." My sister and I absolutely freaked out. We still talk about it to this day, and we both remember it exactly the same way. When I was around 12 years old, I was riding my bike on the trails near a golf course. There are high-tension power lines running through the park, so a clearing cuts through the forest. A car pulled into the clearing, and I noticed the back seat was full of people with only the driver up front. They stopped, everyone got out, and they dragged a guy who was screaming out of the back seat. They beat him up a bit and then shot him twice, once in the gut for pain and suffering, I guess, and once in the head. They stuffed the dead guy back into the back seat. Everyone piled back into the car, just like before, and off they went. I stayed hidden in the brush, completely dumbfounded and scared to death, until they were out of sight. I went over to where the car had been parked. There was no mess at all, just tire tracks and footprints. It was like it hadn't actually happened. I rode home and didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. After dinner, everyone got busy with whatever they were doing, so I went to my parents' bedroom to use the phone. I called 911 to report it, told them I wanted to remain anonymous. They thanked me for the report, and I hung up. I never heard anything about it on the news. They must have done a thorough job getting rid of the body, but I still find it weird that I couldn't see any traces of what I just witnessed right in front of my own eyes. So, I've been living with this memory of watching a man get murdered for close to 40 years now, and I think it has influenced my outlook on everything. About 25 years ago, my now ex-wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both kept noticing that we always had that feeling when coming up the stairs from the cellar, like something was going to grab you as soon as you turn off the light switch. Everything else about the house seemed normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you moved a tiny third hand to the spot on the clock face for whatever time you wanted to wake up. For example, halfway between the 6 and 7 to wake up at 6:30. It's a physical process, and there's very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us at 6 a.m. It wasn't something we messed with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at around 2 in the morning. Old school ringing bells. Both my ex-wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my ex-wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. It scared the hell out of me. I have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there, but that creepy cellar feeling never went away. My mom and I were driving from Texas to Washington in late October. We stopped to rest at this national park in southern Colorado and were pretty much the only people there. We usually stopped during daylight because my mom preferred driving at night. We were sitting there making something to eat when this guy on a bicycle went past us and just glared at us with these hate-filled eyes. My mom and I were pretty creeped out by him, but we went on about our business and then laid down in the car to sleep, her up front and my boxer and me in the back seat. I got this feeling like I was being watched, and then my dog's hackles went up and she started doing this really deep, guttural kind of growl. She only ever made that growl when she was seriously bothered by something. I reached over and chambered around to my shotgun. My mom heard me and said, "Hey, are you awake? Do you want to get out of here?" I said, "Hell yeah, I do." We got up, and I stood guard with my shotgun and the dog while she packed everything into the car, and then we left. We couldn't see him, but we could both feel him watching us, and the dog didn't settle down again until we'd left that place far behind. We made a beeline for Moab and stopped at a truck stopped to rest instead. When we got up, we went inside and got something to eat and met this really friendly trucker. We told him what had happened. He shadowed us northward for quite a ways and then handed us off to other truckers. They shadowed us all the way to Idaho. They were all a great bunch of guys for sure.